Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day. I hope that the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. And I hope the wind is at your back. I have an incredible show for you today. A friend of mine, a reoccurring guest, and an amazing individual. Reverend Dr. Jessica Rochester is the Madrinha and president of the Sud de Montréal, a Santo Daime Ayahuasca church she founded in 1997 in Montreal, Canada. She's a transpersonal counselor. She trained in the work of Dr. Roberto Assagioli and trained with Dr. Stanislav Grof. She worked with Health Canada from 2000 until 2017 to achieve an Section 56 exemption to import and serve the Santo Daime Sacrament. She's an ordained interfaith minister with a doctorate in divinity. From 1986 to 2018, she has been a workshop leader, a teacher, and in private practice. She is the author of Ayahuasca Awakening, a guide to self-discovery, self-mastery, and self-care, volumes 1 and 2. She continues to lecture on consciousness, non-ordinary consciousness, self-discovery, spiritual development, health and well-being, and personal transformation. Dr. Jessica, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I just have to say, I always love your introductions. And, here you are going about the birds singing and the wind at your back. Well, I'm sorry to say the birds are not singing in Montreal and the wind is in your face. And with the wind chill factor, it's like minus 27 or something. I could hardly walk yesterday. I mean, the wind was so strong. I love being outside. I love being in nature. I like to see the trees and the earth and the flowers and the birds singing, and you got it all that, okay, except this Quebec winter. The only thing that hangs around are a few crows, okay, and some sparrows, and usually some very hungry Cooper's hawks who are, they come into the city around this time because they've got hungry and they're looking at what they can find. So I always have to laugh where you are, the sun is shining and the birds are singing, and we're struggling through snowdrifts taller than I am. Okay, if you were to look at Snowstorm Montreal, okay, you would see, and that brings us to the topic today.
Yes,
is something, is about. We're going to talk about grieving for a whole bunch of reasons. It's a topic that you and I have never discussed, and there's a specific reason why we're going to be talking about it today, for me anyway. And not that it isn't a pertinent conversation to be having regularly, because there's so much that happens in everybody's lives that is connected to loss. And so we're going to talk about grieving and loss and kind of how species-centric we are and how easy it is to go into a little bubble around a variety of things that happen. So the reason we're talking about it today is because on January 31st, my husband died. Now, we had been together for 30 years now, except 7 years ago, he had a tragic accident which broke his neck, C3, C4, for anybody who knows what I'm talking about, which meant it left him quadriplegic. As an artist, he actually was atypical that he had a little movement in his right arm, just enough that after a year, he started to ask me for colored pencils and paper, and he wanted to have a go because he loved his art. And so I'm going to talk about loss a little bit from his viewpoint, and then loss from the general viewpoint, okay? Now, I had 7 years to grieve as his health declined. Now, this was something I had encountered many times in the decades that I worked in my private practice, where people had a loved one, a family member, a dear friend, perhaps somebody close to them, who suffered from something that dragged. Okay, and this might be before medical assistance in dying, which of course we have here in Quebec now for many, many years. And so you had no other choice but to accompany the person on the journey. And these journeys are difficult. Are you still with me? Yeah? George, are you still with me? Yes?
Yeah, we had a little slight. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm here a little bit. Yeah, it kind of faded out our connection a little bit.
Yeah, a little technical glitch going on. Okay, I'm going to take that somehow the internet is being sympathetic to the conversation and is agreeing or something.
Right.
Um, you take it as it is. So, loss is. I was just saying that many people get to accompany somebody through a difficult journey. Some deaths are sudden and there's no warning. It's just bang gone. Okay, that's a completely different kind of grieving because there's no preparation for it. It's the loss. It's sudden. There's no preparation. Whereas with something similar to what I went through of 7 years of accompanying my husband through his his situation and his medical conditions, you have all the time to contemplate and meditate on what grief, loss, attachment, love, what all of these things are about. So, in the 7 years, I'm going to share a few things in case they're helpful for you and for the listeners, which is you learn how deeply we become attached. That's the first thing. We become attached to the things that we like. We become attached to the things that we want. We become attached to the beliefs we have about how we think our world should be, how we think our life should be. And we realize, those of us who are on a path of self-exploration and self-mastery, realize pretty quickly how selfish we are, how we long for things to be convenient, how we want things to be comfortable, familiar, the known. And when it all goes out the window, okay, and we are facing the unknown, the uncomfortable, the unwanted, right? Then we have to come to terms with actually who we really are. That's where your character shows up. That's where your character shows up. That's where your faith shows up. That's where your authenticity shows up. You come to understand that you need, whatever you are doing, that you need to balance it with some genuine authenticity within yourself. You learn to grieve what was. You learn to grieve what wasn't, that now has no possibility of being. So to all of you out there who are thinking, oh, well, I'll just save up a little more money and then I'll go on that holiday. Or you know what, I'll wait till I retire to take up whatever hobby it is or whatever thing it is that you think you might want to do or learn. No, actually do it now. So one of the biggest lessons that you learn is that in the end, we have no control over things. But life arrives. What did John Lennon say? Famous quote, life is what happens while you're making other plans.
Yeah.
Now, he might have been quoting somebody else, I don't know, but he's the last person of reference I have on that one. And so you have to come to terms with this. What was, and that can be a grieving process in itself. As you have to review, you give yourself a little bit of a report card. Is this making sense? Okay, how did I do in that relationship? I mean, if you really want to understand yourself, so there's the loss, there's the coping, there's the adjusting, there's the grieving process, which we'll talk about in a moment. The stages of grieving and loss, Kubler-Ross's work and Stephen Levine's work, and but in the end, you have to go deep inside of yourself, and you find out a little bit more who you are in the face of loss. Now, loss is, did you want to say something? You're looking so thoughtful.
For me too, like my wife has stage 3 cancer, and everything you're saying right now is a process that I seem to be not only learning about, but going through on some level. And, that you spoke about attachment, and this seems like a tricky balance. Like, how do you, letting go of someone for a long time seems like you're attached to this thing, but releasing too soon seems like a betrayal in some ways. It's a weird balance. Like, I think it's trying to teach us balance on some level.
That's a very good observation, because grieving is a process. It's not a thing that you do and that's it. You know, it's a process that has many stages to it, and you can cycle through the stages over and over again. Now, Kubler-Ross identified them, and they became part of the cornerstone of the approaches in palliative care, for example. You know, and certainly in the hospitals. Here in Canada, I can only imagine that that would be the same in Europe and the United States for sure, which is understanding the stages that people go through. The first one is denial. Well, this can't be happening, you know. My husband had denial for 7 years, as close as even when he was really declining from about December, early December. It was 7 years in December from the accident. He was still in denial. I think I'm getting a little stronger. Maybe in the spring I'll get up more. So what do you do with that? That was a whole learning unto itself, you know, of how to deal with somebody who's decided they're going to pitch their tent in stage 1 of the grieving process, which is denial. Yeah. And then there's anger. You're angry that this thing has happened. You're angry at the loss. You're angry at life handing you this, you know, misfortune, this strife, this struggle, that something that's been special or precious to you is now gone and it's not coming back. Okay. Or something that was precious to you is now walking away from you. So it's not just death that we grieve, and we'll get that, but we'll get a little further down onto more deeply into that. So back to the stages, denial. In some circumstances, denial is actually a very good indicator of recovery. They say that research in people who have heart attacks, a certain amount of denial around it actually really helps them recover. Okay, I mean, that sounds obtuse, but if you think about it, it's like, okay, I'm going to be fine, actually might be a really good attitude to have in that moment. And so we move from denial into anger, where we face and experience, you know, whatever it is the anger is about. Most of all, it's usually personal inconvenience. I mean, that sounds terribly selfish, but come on, let's own it. I you know, all my years I've been working with this, almost nobody actually names these things, except maybe in the privacy of my office, where they know it's confidential and it's never going to be repeated in their family. No, but it's personal inconvenience. How terrible this has happened. Yes, terrible, but what about me? Okay. What about me? What about my life? This is interrupting my life. This is interfering with my plans. This means I have to deal with things I don't want to have to deal with. So that's all part of it. That's all part of the anger stage. Then there's bargaining. If I'm really good, maybe this will go away. If I'm really good, if I bargain with, if I do this, if I do that, you know, so this whole bargaining discussion that can be an internal dialogue with the universe or an external one with whoever's there, you know, so there's all this bargaining that goes on. And then there's depression, when you realize, I guess I have to accept whatever this is. And then there's acceptance. Now, it's not a straight line. It's not chapter 1 through 5, read straight through. It's a cycle. You can go from denial, get into the anger, feel somewhat depressed, do a little piece of acceptance, work your way right back into anger, okay? And so it's understanding that we might cycle through these things a few times until we feel kind of, okay, I think I've accepted it now. I think that I've come to a place of let go, of the inner peace, of kind of like, what would your definition of acceptance be?
That's a great question. I guess for me, the definition of acceptance is realizing that there's a bigger process that I don't know enough about, and that I have to have faith. Acceptance is faith to me.
Okay. Now, you said your wife has stage 2 cancer. First of all,
Stage 3.
Stage 3. Oh, I thought you
Yeah.
said stage 2. Okay. And so I know privately I've sent all good vibrations and
Yes,
good
you have.
wishes and prayers
Yeah.
and love and light and
Um,
everything possibly to, help you feel supported in the situation. And, lots more of healing vibrations to you, to her, and to your whole family,
Thank
you
you.
know. And as you struggle with the situation in front of you, and, today's our conversation, some of it may feel personal, not just
Totally.
intellectual, And so, back to Buddhism for a minute, for all the great traditions, I have to say that I'm so grateful to the Buddha for the simplicity of the teachings. None of us is, it's from the Four Great Truths. No one escapes illness or suffering. Everybody has some in their life. Okay? Life is difficult. No one escapes illness or suffering. We all age, we all die. When we can accept that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. How many times I've said that to people to help them see, this too will pass.
Yes.
Everything ultimately does. We just may not like the story of how it unfolds. That's the peace. How to come to be at peace with the story as it's unfolding. And that, I think, is the most difficult part. How can I be here now? How can I live in simplicity and a certain level of inner content or peace or tranquility or serenity when all this is happening in my life? When I've had this loss or I'm facing this loss, what's going to help? The same thing that helps when you've had a loss is when you're facing a loss. They're the same things. The first one is take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Because we can't help anybody else if we're not in reasonably good shape ourselves. So taking care of ourselves, that means physically, with good nutrition and our vitamins and regular exercise, and then whatever practice of meditation or Tai Chi or yoga or prayer or a faith or religious practice that encourages and supports our own faith. So taking care of ourselves. If we know that we're taking care of ourselves, and this is not selfish, it's not. If we keep denying ourselves to try and prevent loss or try and cope with loss, we will only end up in getting codependent and collapsing. Now, for many people, codependency is very tempting because it feels like I'm doing something. It feels like I'm actively doing something. Well, yeah, but that something may not lead to well-being for the people involved. I myself am a cancer survivor. It's more than 30 years, 34 years ago now. And I've had so many clients and friends who are gone now, who did their journey with that illness and other illnesses. And what I can say is there's something of deep presence and learning that can be had. I'm going to quote Jack Cornfield now. He says, the only question you ask is, how well did I love? Right? How well did I love? And you know from prior conversations, maybe a year or so ago, that codependency is not love.
Right.
It's not. And so it's going back deep inside of ourselves and saying, okay, what here is real? What's authentic? What's now? What is going to be the way to serve? Good question. Are we given the space to grieve? No, we're not usually given it. We have to actually create it. Okay. That's the thing, is we can't wait around expecting someone to hand it to us. We have to have healthy boundaries. We have to say, I'm not going to be able to do this right now. We have to be able to say, I'm sorry, could somebody else do this? I'm sorry, no, I can't do that. Okay, we need to have healthy boundaries. We need to be able to ask for help. We need to be able to put that out there. Can someone please help me with this? And whether that someone is a professional of whatever kind. Oh, and I want to do a little, I shouldn't call it a proselytizing, but a little, it's more than guiding, but I'm going to bring out my strict voice now. Okay, my teacher voice. Anybody listening, if you don't already have your will, could you please do that this week? Anybody who hasn't made their full power of attorney, what I'm not sure wherever you are, wherever you live, it might be called a mandate in the event of my inability, or better still, a full power of attorney, so that everything is in order. And the third piece is prepay your funeral. You know, a few years ago, I sat with Sydney, my now gone husband, and I said to him, Sydney, this is what I'm going to do. Now, he always knew that I was going to look for some kind of a environmentally sound way. At first, it was just going to be cremation because I didn't want to have all that metal and everything, and lacquered wood put into the ground. I couldn't possibly see how that would help. So I would every now and again check what green burials were like. So it has to be 3, maybe 4 years ago now. I looked into green burials here in Montreal, and I was delighted to see that they have come a long way. And so I sat with him and I said, well, this is what I'm going to do. And it's really simple, and you get cremated, and then, this is Quebec, it's not going to happen this week, but obviously when spring comes, there's a service, and the ashes are combined in the earth with a tree, and you can choose your tree. There's this beautiful grove on the side of one of the main cemeteries here in Montreal, up on the mountain. And you're planted in your spot with the tree that you've chosen. So your ashes go into the earth, which is kind of very, for me, feels right. And it becomes part of the tree. And so we chose our trees and which tree we want. And we both chose a kind of tree that gives berries, that feeds the birds, because I love birds. And the idea of feeding birds really fits my idea of things. And so he agreed, which was extraordinary because all the decades previously that I had tried to kind of nudge him into talking about things like that, he didn't want. He had that, kind of classic male, vital, I'll be here forever and I'll always be strong, and everything that I want, I can go after and get. And he had very much that kind of an energy. So this accident just threw everything out, So I was absolutely delighted that he's agreed with that. And, make your life easy. One phone call, when I saw the day before, okay, it's going to be very close now, one phone call and everything was in place. And so this is the thing about understanding that there will be loss. It doesn't mean that we dwell on it, but we just have this calm, respectful understanding that the greatest gift we can give to those who we are going to leave behind is to have everything in place, to have everything simple and in place, that our wishes will be respected to the best of anyone's ability as to what we wish to happen, And then it's quietly resting and waiting until the time that it is needed. And then when it's needed, it just goes into place. Okay, and it makes everything so much more simple. I've watched people struggle who've had loved ones who haven't left wishes, who haven't had wills, and it makes such a difficult struggle for everybody afterwards. So that's the kind of thought I just want to put out for people, that if you haven't done this, you really might want to think about doing it. Okay, and it isn't gruesome, and it isn't morbid, and it actually doesn't make you die sooner. I can't believe some people actually think if I do my will and I prepare my burial, it means I'll probably get hit by a truck next week. No, it just means that you've made your loved ones have an easier job at managing everything. So, okay, long, slow, deep breath. Can we come back to are we given the space?
Yes.
And I was saying, no, we have to take it. But what does that look like? What does it look like, taking the space that we need to grieve?
I think it's like you said, it can come off looking like selfish. It can come off looking like denial. But I think it pairs nice with what you said. Like, you have to be in shape mentally, physically, emotionally. You have to be the best of you to take care of someone else. Like, you have to there's so many lessons in there when it comes to that. I don't want to go too far off topic, but I think giving yourself time or space to grieve is also giving yourself time to learn the lessons that life is trying to teach you. For me, the space to grieve has been quiet moments where I realize I perceive time differently. Like, I don't see time the same way anymore. Like, the grieving process has a way of forcing you into this eternal now. This ideas that you thought were important, at least to me, have sort of shedded this way. Sometimes the space to grieve seems like darkness, where there's nothing there, until all of a sudden this ember of insight warms up inside of you, and you're like, whoa, I never thought about that. So given the space to grieve is finding time for yourself to have these insights that are both heartwarming and, crushing at the same time. I know that's kind of not really a tight definition, but that's what I think of.
And you certainly weren't off topic at all. Okay, you were right smack on topic. So give yourself a break there. So yes, and what that looks like is different for everyone. Some of us need the alone, quiet, our own space where we can cry, or we can meditate, or we can pray, or we can ask questions, or we can sort through all the photographs of the journey shared together. Okay, we can think of all the memories, we can deal with any regrets. I mean, few Frank Sinatra regrets, but then again, too few to mention.
Yeah.
Is that what he sings? Okay, that's a good place.
Yeah.
That's a good place. I mean, it's impossible to live a life and not have a few regrets. Okay, it's just not possible. Oh, I wish I'd done that thing differently, or I should have really said yes to that, and I should have said no to that. Okay, that's actually healthy. To dwell on them or fester in them is not. To accept them, to learn from them. What can I learn from this? How can I weave this into my life story of who I am in this reality, and how I intend my life from the inside to flow to the outside, knowing I have little control over what the flow of life, the drift of life is doing. But how do I navigate myself in the drift of life? And we will encounter losses. I mean, there's, remember the teenage years when we lost our childhood? we went from endless summers where all we did was play, right? Run out the back door and climb apple trees and ride our bike up and down the street and maybe go to summer camp if that was part of it. And in the winter, there'd be a snow day. There was no school yesterday. Everything was canceled. We could go anywhere. I mean, they still haven't cleared most of the streets of the sidewalks. The drifts are up to here, if not higher. So snow days were fabulous. But then slowly, all of a sudden, that sounds like because it feels slow, but then it's all of a sudden it's gone. All of a sudden it's gone. And then there's adolescence and body changing and moods and all these strange things that happen. And then there's high school, and then there's, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? And when we start to understand at a certain point in our life that life is this steady stream of change, of attracting, holding on to, embracing, and then letting go. And how to become masterful at that? How do we open? How do we open to life? Because I found that I think most people are partly open, and some more so than others, to life and to what life is bringing, and how to navigate that. So how to open and receive in the moment what is here and what is happening, how to navigate skillfully with that, how to embrace it, and then how to let it go. Whether it's a stage in our life, chapters in our life, much as we have adolescence at one end, we have the late 40s and the early 50s at the other. Okay. And there's a big closure, maybe more so for women, more noticeably for women. But there's all these stages in life. And what we have to do is we actually have to grieve that that stage is done. That stage is done. It's, there's something very interesting that happens to women, about how we go through these stages in life. And actually, nobody can see it, but this entire wall is covered with all these fabulous images. It's what I've always done in my office, so that people sitting there, for example, are always looking at these fabulous archetypal, transformational, transpersonal images. Okay. And I have the babe, the maiden, the mother, and the crone right across the top, those being female in this life. And those are the stages. And at the loss of each one, as those chapters are closing, okay, how do we say, wow, all the good things? So gratitude. Look at all the good things. Okay, there were hard things, there were difficult things, and wow, I have so much gratitude that I have the strength or the will, the support, the grace, whatever helped me through that. Okay, but I'm here, and wow, gratitude for everything that was good, that was a blessing, that I could open and receive. And then grieve the things that were hard, that were difficult. And sometimes that means, yes, actually grieving, actually like crying and going through those stages, which are normal, human, healthy stages to recognize and understand deeply, And as things go full cycle, so there's two things that become important. You see, there's a question here. I can't quite.
It's from
0 to 7, 7 to 35, 35 to death. No, I never heard that. That's sort of leaving out some very important developmental processes. Okay, I would say 0 to 6 is the years of dependency, and then smoothing through from dependency until you hit around 12 when you get into counter to dependency. And then that's where we cling to life and dependency, cling to mom, dad, and what have you. And then we start pushing away. We need to identify ourselves separate from, okay? And then once we emerge through that with its very important conceptual level changes at around the age 13 to 14 and then 15 to 16, once we hit 18, we have this, wow, okay, independence. I can drink, I can drive, I can vote, all these important things. I know it's 18 to 21 in the range there. That's because our brain keeps developing until we're about 21. Our body will still, we have to say, really, it's about early 20s when we can finally say, okay, this is now, I'm at my peak of development, and now everything from here forward is maintenance and decline. So, right? And depending on how well we do maintenance. So then after independence, after we've found our independence, we realize that we're not independent at all. I'm completely dependent on Hydro-Quebec to give me electricity and etc. I'm completely dependent on Canada to give me passport and pay me money for my work and give me social structure and education structure and Medicare, and we are interdependent. And that is considered to be, that level of maturity is something that we keep maturing with, a greater and greater understanding of interdependency, of how we're all connected, and how when you grieve, I grieve. Now, it's not a personal loss, but it can relate to a personal loss because loss is something that is the deepest of human experiences. No, it isn't sex, actually, but it's loss, okay? A lot of people get fooled by that one, right? I'm not putting that one, I'm not trying to minimize the importance of that. I'm just saying it has its appropriate and healthy place in all human life, but loss is the deepest, okay? On the emotional level, loss is the deepest. And they're often connected, romantic relationships and loss are certainly all those romantic love songs and
Yeah.
books and plays and films are about love and loss, right? So it's deeply embedded in the story of the human experience. So we talked about in any process of loss, or at least the map, the cartography that I work with is that loss is something that we're experiencing at a regular basis. It might be a small thing. We lose our keys. It's a small loss compared to the loss of a loved one, okay? But every loss we experience, we can learn something about ourselves and about the nature of reality, of what it is to be human, what it is to be in community, and what we can learn about how to cope with loss. Does this make sense, George?
Yeah, it kind of begs the question for me, like, and the question is there a difference in the way the body grieves versus the way the mind grieves? I was wondering if you could touch on that a little bit.
Ooh, okay. So can we break it down differently? I like that question. Thank you. Can we say the body and the mind, and then the emotional level, the soul level, and then the spiritual. Okay, so if we can do that. So the body, yes, because if we're talking about, I mean, I know this is going to sound perhaps, in the face that my husband just died 2 weeks ago, but I had 7 years to come to terms with that. The first year and a half, there was a whole lot of grieving. Okay. And then I was able to come to terms with, okay, this is it. And I got through the stages in cycle after cycle. Okay. So by year 2, I felt like I'd really found my feet in it and that I was really able to go. And then the next few years, it was just making adjustments as to what felt like the right way to go forward. And then, year by year, coming to terms with how to manage myself and how to be in a kind and respectful place you know, which kindness and respect for me are great manifestations of love. They are. Would you agree? Kindness
Yeah.
are real manifestations of love. That love isn't like just the clingy, romantic, sexual stuff. That's fabulous stuff, by the way. I'm not diminishing it, but it's those really deep, centered, firm experiences of inner peace and tranquility and serenity in the face of being able to manifest kindness and respect in these processes of coming to terms with things, you know? So one thing, and you know, I want to use my mom. It's a perfect example. Actually, the last 2 years have been interesting for me with loss because, first of all, the father of my children, my first husband, he died 2 years ago. Then last a year, so October 2023, my 102-year-old mother died.
Oh,
So there was plenty of time to come to terms with. There was nothing sudden about that. Okay, there was plenty of time to make sure everything was complete and everything that needed to be said had been said. Anything that needed to be understood had been understood. Anything that needed to be done was done. Those are the good things that you can make sure of when you see that there is a decline and you see that there's, you know, things that need to be addressed, you know, which you don't get with a sudden death. With a sudden death, you can be left with, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I say that? Why didn't I ask about that? You know, those are hard parts for some people about the grieving. So this is what I'm going to share with you about my mom is very common. Okay, my father's death was quite sudden. And so there was only a couple of days between the time he fell ill and then he passed. 2 days, really. And so she could not take his clothes out of the closet. It took a year and a half to 2 years. She wouldn't take his dressing gown off the back door in their bedroom. She wouldn't take it out. She needed that. She said, I need to be able to smell. It was very physical. She needed to have that physical sense of that she could still connect to him in that. Now, they'd been nearly 60 years together, so that's a long time. I mean, she was 18 or 19 or something, 20 maybe, when they were very, very young when they married during Second World War. So this is very normal. I had many clients who said they can't. They need that time. It's part of the coming to terms with and letting go. That thought that they can still hold on to physical aspects of the person, the way the person smelled. Now, that makes sense if we understand that the sense of smell is really the strongest sense that we have when we're born. Our eyes are barely working yet. Our hearing isn't making sense of much. I mean, we hear when we're in our mother's body, but we're hearing her digestive system and her heartbeat and all of those things, okay, the plumbing. And that's what we're hearing when we're in our mother's body, you know. And but smell is the first thing. That you can see that in kittens and puppies and, you know, in humans. It is smell that is there, and basically that's the strongest identification with the recognition of kind of the tonality of the voice without understanding any words that are being spoken, and the mother's heartbeat, because those are the things that are familiar. So it's the sense of smell, actually, where often people have the deepest attachment, where just the scent of, let's say, a beloved's perfume or aftershave will activate a very strong memory. For my husband, my association will always be Nag Champa incense, because that was his favorite incense and he always wanted to burn it. So anytime I'm going to smell Nag Champa, I'm going to think of him. It's, you know, for somebody else, it might be certain songs. It might be that will activate memories that are strong and have deep meaning, you know, deep meaning. And so we physically, there's that the loss for if it's a and this only really, is individual by individual. Okay, you can't say it's for everyone, but there will be that loss of the sense of the physical closeness. So to be able to, if it's a parent, to be able to hug them or hold their hand or talk, the sound of their voice. If it's a partner, a loved one, a romantic partner, it might be the intimacy that comes from the closeness of the emotional and romantic partnership. It will be layered with how connected you are to the person on a physical level. The more connected on a physical level, obviously the body will miss. I'm going to use I had lots of cats in my life. I don't see your ginger cat anymore. You don't let her or him in your room. I love ginger cat. So I have had many cats. I had a ginger cat when I was a teenager, and named Ginger. And I have had quite a few cats in between, but there was two cats who were really very special to me, two Burmese brothers. I can still cry thinking about them. Okay, they've been gone many years now. They've been gone many years, but they were so deeply connected to on a physical and a spiritual level. Now you're going to say that's a little crazy. No, these guys were really spiritual cats. Anybody who's read my books can read stories about my cats and how they intuited things that were happening that they had no other way of knowing other than through some transpersonal means, some non-ordinary state of consciousness means, because there's no other way that they could possibly know things were happening, And so when, the one went and then a year later the other did, I missed their dear little furry bodies, their purring, their company, And so, there's a physical aspect to loss that may not have anything to do with romance. I did not have a romantic relationship with my cats. Let's just put that straight, okay? That's too weird. It was deeply loving, and I'm sure all people who love animals and have had animal companions know exactly what I'm talking about, whether it's a parrot or a horse, that there's that deliciousness that can happen, that real strong connection on a physical level. And that is a loss when that is not there anymore. It's a loss. And you just have to grieve the sadness. And there's no way of avoiding it. There's no way of filling it up with something else. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Remind me if I don't naturally go there. Okay. Emotionally, again, we have many different types of I've lost so many dear friends, and they're deep losses. Gone. Just gone. And there's a sadness, there's a we go through the cycle of missing and feeling a connection with, and something reminds us, and what brings an inner peace in loss is gratitude. Gratitude for all the good things shared. Gratitude for the teachings, not just the lunches or dinners or birthdays or, get-togethers or something like that. You see, talk about my cats. It's crazy. Immediately need to tear up a little bit and blow my nose. Crazy, eh? But it's gratitude for the good things shared, gratitude for the good teachings, gratitude for all the parts of the journey, and then gratitude for the teachings that we learned in the hard parts, what we learned about ourselves, what we learned about life. So gratitude for that. And then, for those of us who are spiritual people, wishing well, wishing well. in our spiritual practice in the Santo Daime, we have, and many of these I was doing hybrid versions and teaching hybrid versions and more kind of neutral, non-denominational versions through all the years, trying to help my clients with ritual come to terms, because ritual is really helpful in loss. Doesn't matter what it is. We have kind of very common rituals for birth and for the rites of passages for marriage. There's the wedding and the marriage and the party and the vows and all that jazz. Then we have rituals for death, for the passing of someone, the end of someone's life. And now, how do we make that feel personal and right for us? And how do we make it fit? And what are the kind of rituals that we do when we're alone? Is there a ritual that we can do when we're alone? Is there a meditation, a prayer? Is there a ascending light? In my tradition and in the Santo Daime, we don't try to hold on to anybody. I know in some other traditions they honor their ancestors. Many traditions honor their ancestors. This is common to many traditions. And some kind of try to hold on to them, like they try and talk to auntie so-and-so or uncle so-and-so or grandma so-and-so. That's okay. I personally don't do that. And it's not a common practice in the Santo Daime, because we more or less believe that we need to let that person go so they can follow their karma. We don't know if they might reincarnate. We don't know. Maybe they're reincarnating right now. And if we're trying to hold them back into the Uncle Harry life, how can they go further on in their own soul evolution, whatever that soul evolution is going to look at? And so this is a kind of a deeper letting go. That's vastly different if someone decides to show up, like for quite a few years after my father passed, he would appear to me in dreams. And he would only appear when he had a really important message to give me. I would wake up in the morning and I knew I'd received a message from my father, from the astral. And I mean, my earth father, I don't mean heavenly father, okay? I mean, earth father, my father. So my dad, okay? And I knew immediately I had to do exactly what he told me. The information that he transmitted to me in that dream was powerfully important for me to follow. And so those kinds of things, people have always shared with me their spiritual experiences, and where some ancestor or parent or recently deceased has showed up in a dream or a meditation and has shown them something. Again, in my books, I talk about some of my personal experiences, some which were a little bit more shocking in the moment, but which I came to understand and receive great teachings on. And so that too is a deep letting go, when we have a sense of somebody, and just to send light, just to send light and send more light, and not telling them what to do or where to go or anything like that, but just thank you and light. There's a little hymn I received that we include in the Mass. We have a special ritual that we do after someone's passed, and it's the Santo Daime Mass. It's not like an Anglican Mass or a Catholic Mass. And the hymn goes is very short and simple. Goodbye, farewell. See you in a little while. Goodbye, farewell. See you on the other side. May you travel swiftly, carried by the divine light. May you travel swiftly straight into the heart of God. That's it. Simple. Go into the light. Be at peace. All is good. All is well. No. Did you want to say something?
I'm just taking it all in. It's interesting to think about the relationship you have with someone after they pass on to whatever comes next. And I enjoy hearing about the way in which different people communicate that way. It's also interesting to hear about your father coming back to you in a dream on some level. Like, is there why do you think that is? Like, on some level, if they're reincarnating, if they're coming back in a different way, how do they still have the ability? I know this is kind of a crazy question, but how do they have the ability to come back and talk to us? Is that something bigger than both of us, or is it a manifestation, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on this are based on my experiences.
Right.
Okay. So, this is, I'm going to compare it to scuba diving. When you're looking at the ocean, it's big and it's blue and it's powerful and it's noisy and there's waves and there's currents and everything's going on. And then you put on your scuba gear and you go out in the boat and then you drop down 30 feet, 50 feet, 70 feet, 90 feet, however deep you're going. And you're in a whole other world. And you can communicate quite differently, from down there. Now,
Yeah.
I have to say that, yes, what you said, is there something just so much larger than us that we don't really understand it? Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that. It is our little human brain would love to be able to intellectually understand this and put it all nicely
Yeah.
in a little package. Like, wow, look, I just did the Rubik's Cube. Okay.
Yeah.
In like 3 minutes flat. Okay. No, I can't do that, by the way. But no, the universe is not a Rubik's Cube that we can just fiddle with and master. Okay. It is the great mystery. And I might have shared this experience. If I have, then, you're going to hear it again. But I was once, and I wasn't in a Daime work. I was just I was just kind of not quite asleep yet. I was actually meditating, lying on my back in a very open position and just breathing and meditating. And all of a sudden, bang, I felt I went up as far, far, as high as I could into the light. And high, high, high until I felt like I was on, I don't know what, the ceiling of heaven. I don't know how else even to describe it. And I was still connected to my body in some way. And I asked the question, what lies beyond here? What lies beyond this? Very clearly and quickly, the answer came back. As long as you're still connected to your human being form, you won't know. Okay. They told me.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, so from that moment, I stopped trying to figure it out. And so all I can say is this, is as a spiritual person who, and I believe all people are spiritual people, and it's their individual connection to that helps them to develop it in any given lifetime or to focus on other things. And that's their karma, and that's theirs to follow, and we shouldn't be fiddling with it. Okay? We shouldn't be telling other people how to do that. If they ask, we can share. If they ask, we can give guidelines. Okay? That's all I think we can do and support. And then it's between them and their higher self. What is going to unfold and how that's going to be and what that's going to look like. And it isn't a Santa Claus wish list. No, you're not going to get all that stuff under the tree on Christmas morning. You might get something that you had no idea you were going to get when you asked for your spiritual awakening. It might come in such a package that you had no idea. And you're going to go, what? Sure, this is it? I didn't ask for this. Yeah, but if you do that, that's what's going to lead you where you need to go. That's called cosmic humor.
Mm.
And that's another thing, gratitude and a sense of humor. And it's not macabre, okay? No one should think it's macabre. A sense of humor is actually what helps us go through some of the most difficult times in our life, is finding some humor in it, being able to make light of ourselves, not light of anybody else, but just make light of ourselves and life's condition, So what is out there and how do people manage to connect with us, or beings of light, guardians of light? Now, in my belief systems, and again, Santo Daime very, very much in alignment with my personal experiences and belief systems, because otherwise I wouldn't be walking the path, is that there is reincarnation, that there is something that is, whether we want to call it an eternal soul, an evolving soul, a transforming soul, if we even want to call it a soul or a spirit or an essence, that there's a something. Okay, it won't be my body, that will go. It won't be my character, no, that will go too. My personality, no. My mind, no. Okay, it's not going to be any of those things, because that goes with the, the outer flesh. But there's a something that will continue its evolutionary experience. Now, do we incarnate, boom, one after another? No, I think that there can be a period of, in human experience, what we call time. Now, is it possible for all of the above? Yes, it's possible to go very quickly from one death into another lifetime. Okay? The Buddha says that's why babies cry. Buddha said babies cry because they're going, here again?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that humor. I love the humor in Buddhism. Oh, I'm here again. For the last few months of my mother's life, she would wake up and she'd go, I'm still here. Sense of humor. A very famous quote, which I find very interesting, attributed to Marlon Brando. The last words he said before he passed was, "What was all that about?" What was all that about? And when I read that, it's like, yeah, you nailed it. It's like we get some kind of life review, and we go, what was all that about? All that psychodrama and silliness and nonsense and ego and all those silly things we did and all the good things we could have done and we didn't. And oh, thank God I did a few good things, So, yes, it's a great mystery. And at the same time, I myself have encounters with what I can only call the beings of the light, with spiritual guides, and I'm not alone in this. This is a very large percentage of the human population. If you look at the research, you're going to see that I think it's over 2/3 of even American research of people have had encounters with what they call spiritual encounters, and that have been very meaningful for them. Okay, so this is part of the human experience. And we can say we don't fully understand it, because we don't. We don't fully understand gravity. We don't really understand, black holes. All right, we don't understand the Big Bang and the universe expanding. So we can just try and be humble and say there's so much that we don't understand, that we just have to accept that this is part of it, and we know a tiny little bit, and maybe in time we'll know a little bit more. And there's enough research on reincarnation that's been followed through, where people remember where they lived and remembered people there and went back and identified them. And there's not that holds any great interest for me personally. I mean, the research is interesting, but I don't feel like I need to go back and say, oh yeah, I lived there when I was in another life. I mean, I don't personally feel the pull to do that, because I think being here now in this life is so important. I have relived past lives in non-ordinary states of consciousness, and I am extremely grateful for those experiences. They taught me a lot about me in this lifetime and patterns that came in with me that I don't want to be repeating in this lifetime. Does that make some sense? Yes? Now,
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Was there anything that we said, oh yeah, we'll talk about that later, that we didn't talk about yet? I remember saying, okay, we'll get to that. Have we got to all that yet? Have we walked around the block on this one enough now that
I think it was about emotional acceptance. As we were going through the different terms, we're going to come back to emotional, but I can't remember exactly.
Okay, so the physical can be extremely powerful. The missing of holding someone, being
Right.
close to someone. There's the sound of the voice, the smell of their body and their aftershave and perfume and what have you, just our individual scent, and the feel of us, and to hug and to hold, and that loss. Okay, it feels very physical, and it is really emotional. The sadness of not being with that person anymore that has been very important to us, and not always person. It can be a beloved animal companion, for example. It can be the loss of something really important to us. So it doesn't even have to be about people. Okay, some people have retired and it's been like a death.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they've been Professor so and so teaching geography or whatever, okay, for 35, 40, 45 years, and then all of a sudden they aren't that anymore. Okay, and it's these kind of losses are that happen in these stages in our life. Retirement for some people is a joy, and they dance around their home, yay, I'm free. And other people are deep sobbing because now they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
They don't know how to live their life on a daily basis when they're not doing that and being that. And this is all part of the opening to, well, we're right back where we started. How do I not just physically open, but how do I emotionally, psychologically, mentally, spiritually open to life? Life is scary. Life is difficult. Life is joyful. Life is wonderful. Life is exciting. Life is fun. Life is funny. Life is horrible. It's all of those things all together, almost all the time. How do we open to that and breathe with it and let it pass through? Thank you, Stan Grof. One of the so many teachings that he gave us that are so profoundly real. One of the things that will always stay with me, he says, be like the tree. When the difficult things come, it's the wind, let it move through your branches. And if it's really tricky and difficult, then make yourself the stars out in the cosmos. That's how much space there is for that difficult thing to just flow and flow through. So
That's
instead
beautiful.
instead of closing down and shutting down, which is our human tendency, to wall ourselves off, to shut down, to build walls, to build our defense systems, how do we open up physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually? How do we open up? How do we say, okay, life, I got it. Gonna hang on to my little, putting my toolkit in my backpack, my sense of humor, my gratitude, my life skills, my experiences, all the good teachings I received. I'm gonna put them in my backpack and I'm gonna go on my path and carry on my journey. The difficult things come, and sometimes we have to sit down on the path and we have to have a cry or two, and then we need to reach out a hand and ask for help, and we pick ourselves up and we keep on going.
Yep. I like it. That's all there is to do sometimes.
Yeah, gratitude, letting go, opening up, embracing, letting go again, sense of humor. And as somebody asked, how do you make the space? You make the space. You make the space.
Or like you said, the space is all around us. It's just a matter of taking time to be aware of it.
Yes. And to clear the unnecessary things out,
Yeah.
to hand them over, to delegate them, to close them. Okay, it's time to close that thing that I was doing. It's time to step down. It's time to say goodbye to that situation, that person, that job, that whatever it is. It's time to bow to it, thank it for the teachings, and close. And then that creates a space that we can then say, okay, now this is my space to do this. And now what do I need? What's going to help me go through this experience in a way that I will feel authentically supported and authentically myself, and that I'm bringing the best that I can into this moment, because there's only this moment.
Yeah. I wrote down a quote. I don't know if I can find it right here. It's to grieve consciously is to walk the edge between worlds. between what was and what is becoming, between the self you were and the self you are now faced to become.
Yes. Don't know who wrote it, but it's good. I mean, I might have written that. I don't know. I've written so many things that I've lost track of what I've said. And, I always try to attribute. You hear me say, oh, so-and-so
Right.
said this, said that, because I love attribution and being able to give respect to the person who's channeled that good thought.
This one came from ChatGPT, for those that are curious.
Okay, ChatGPT stole it from a few people because that's all ChatGPT is stealing from everywhere all over the internet and sticking it together. Well, who knows
It's
what'll happen.
puzzling, yeah.
Okay, long, slow, deep breath. We've walked the journey today of grieving, and we see that there's stages in life that we need to let go of and go into the next one. That there's nothing new under the sun. That's right. And that I want to say a few words about species centric, because that's setting the stage for our next conversation, which we agreed to, and I promised a few people on LinkedIn that I was going to say more about self-importance and otherness. Okay, so that's our next conversation, whenever that's going to be. But let's spend a moment with how species centric we are, how we seem to in the face of tragedies, and tragedies abound. I don't know if there's more today than there were 100 years ago, or whether there were also there were, of course, storms and monsoons and earthquakes and floods and fires. All of that's been happening forever. So is it just that there are so many more people on the planet, and our activity has disrupted the speed of the natural cycle on the planet, and that our telecommunications has reached the point in technology where we can see instantly something that's happened that we may only get a letter about 3 months after it had happened, if you know what I'm saying. When 100 years ago, letters came on boats, right? And so you'd find out something happened 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And maybe we'd never even know about so many things that would happen. So it's hard to say if more things are happening. But one thing that I find very striking, and I don't know, I hope people won't be offended by this, but I find us very much more species centric than we used to. Maybe I've got it wrong. I'm willing to be wrong on this. Okay. But we saw in the news, like everybody else did, we had terrible forest fires. Now in California, you had them this last few months, terrible forest fires. We had them, the wildfires, all across Canada. I mean, the smoke from it was drifting everywhere. I mean, it was just terrible. I don't remember that in my lifetime, those kind of forest fires and wildfires. Nobody talked about the animals that lived in the forest. The only conversation was about people and the houses that were lost. Now, this is a tragedy. I do not want to diminish the tragedy of the loss that people experienced. The only animals we heard about were somebody's cat or dog that they found or they lost. Wonderful, touching stories about finding their dog 2 weeks later, or their horses that some neighbor had managed to get to safety. Wonderful stories, okay? What about all the wild animals and the birds? And we're so species-centric that have we just stopped thinking about it? It's just a question mark I have. For me, these are terrible losses. These are really terrible losses. I remember when we had the Australian wildfires. I don't know, it's a few years ago now. And somehow, I don't know whether maybe Australia is more enlightened than we are. They immediately focused on the wildlife. There was an absolute immediate focus on getting those darling little koala bears out of the trees and to safety, and saving as much wildlife as they possibly could, rescuing all the wildlife that they could find running across the streets, and going into almost the burning forest and the burning places to try and rescue as much wildlife as they could. I mean, maybe some of it happened, maybe it just wasn't reported, but this for me is a grief. This is a loss. I'm very much Chief Seattle. If you've ever read anything that he's written, it's absolutely beautiful. And he talks about the creatures. And if we forget about the creatures, then we're not going to last very long. He talks about the land. Nobody really owns the land. The land is unto itself. Nobody really owns the creatures. The creatures are unto themselves. And if we forget about the creatures, and if we don't take care of the land and we don't take care of the creatures, how are we going to survive? And so for me, this is part of the unconscious loss that I think is really disturbing our younger people. I think that a lot of the anxiety and depression and addiction that we're seeing is because we are not really grasping the importance of what, yes, lighter horn, whoever you are, some of us are broadening consciousness, some of us are narrowing. Yes, the global politics, the politics globally are only a small voice is trying to be heard, and louder voices, and voices with more money behind them are speaking very loudly right now. And so how do we, because this is a loss of habitat is not, it is on some level, on the heart level, you've heard me say so many times, I write about it in my books, but we're all one. And if we accept that we're one with nature, and, I love the particle physicists, particularly, and, give a shout out to Professor Brian Cox, University of Manchester, Britain, and his beautiful programs on the BBC Earth. For those of you who get it on or love nature, sometimes it's on that, but mainly BBC Earth. And he does an exquisite job of walking through the desert and taking the grains of sand and talking about them and the rocks, and then talking about the universe and the planets and the solar system and the black holes. And he relates everything back down to the particles within us, and how the particles within us are, in this very Einstein, that the particles within us are the same particles that existed at the beginning of the universe. They're just recycled and recycled and recycled and recycled. The phosphorus within us is the same of the nature that makes stars in the universe. And if we honor our earth and the creatures on the earth and our relationship with the earth, if we are able to have gratitude and honor that and take care of it, then I think that we can, if enough people are geared for that we can try and bring things back from the brink. But if we remain species-centric, only focused on personal loss, I lost my house, I lost my car, tragic, yes, we can all relate to that. That's a terrible, awful thing. We can have compassion for it. We can, give money, we'll GoFundMe to help people. We can support our social services to help, etc. Support all our firemen and our policemen and our armed services who do all the work to help in these situations. But what about the land and the creatures? Okay. And we need to help to broaden that. And so we are embracing the wholeness. And I think if we do that, then things will start to come back into balance. Does it make sense, George, what I'm saying? That I look at how mental illness is being, mental illness, all this anxiety and addiction. I'm not saying it's not real. It is real. Okay, but where's it coming from? Is it possibly coming from the fact that the earth is overcrowded? Is it possible that it's coming from the fact that most people have lost their right relationship with nature, with themselves, with community, where everybody's on their phone? Most people eating processed, not healthy food. So they're not connected to nature anymore in their bodies. If you're not eating natural foods, you've already severed a lot of your connection to nature. What do you think? Is there an unconscious longing, grieving, unknowingness that's happening in our communities that are so separated from earth and from spirit and from the universe? And how do we bring that conversation in to help people understand the importance of it? As I said, I hope I don't offend anybody, but it may sound like I like creatures more than I do people.
No,
I like creatures as much as I like people. Okay. I don't like one more than the other. Creatures are equally important.
I think it's as crazy as this might sound, I think it's all necessary. I think we've forgotten like we've talked about loss today in personal relationships. And once you see loss, whether it's your keys or a family member, but once you begin to really sit with loss, then you can expand it outwards and say, wow, look at the creatures, look at the environment, look at the trees. But you have to fundamentally experience loss on some level before you can widen that consciousness, I think. And it's because we've forgotten. And that's why there's going to be more loss. That's why it's so tough right now. It's because we're not realizing that we're all connected. We're all part of this thing. And the more we neglect that and the more we forget and the more we narrow our vision because we don't want to feel the pain, the more pain comes. It's sitting with it. It's realizing like nothing lasts. Nothing lasts.
That's right. Well, on that note, needless to say for today, I am looking forward to thank you so much. It's always a joy to be with you. You and your wife and family will stay in my prayers. Promise me I get to see the ginger cat next time, please. No, I shouldn't do that because then everybody else is going to see the cat wandering around. So I removed that request. Always a joy to be with you. Thank you so much. You stay in my heart and prayers, you, your wife, your family. And I'm sure that you are ensured that you are in good hands. Trust the process. The last thing, as being a cancer survivor, I can say, trust your process. You have to have faith in the process you choose. You have to have faith in that process. Yeah. And you have to open to it and embrace it and kind of surrender to it. Oh, my friend, all good vibrations to you and anyone listening.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jessica. It's always heartwarming and beautiful, and I really, really admire you and the words that you are able to help me and everybody else here kind of see things a little bit different, and it means a lot to me. And I will talk to you shortly. Let's get back to our regular programming, so hang on briefly afterwards. But to everybody within the sound of my voice, if you participated today, if you're listening tomorrow or sometime in the future, Lighter, Core, Clint, everybody, thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. And that's all we got, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.